Welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, episode 20. I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda, and we're your hosts.
And today we're going to be doing another New Zealand podcast, the non-jumping off stuff version.
Are you sure? We might jump off a thing or two.
I'm pretty sure we don't.
Maybe a dog? No, that doesn't even happen, does it?
No more stuff to jump off of. So we left the last podcast in Queenstown, and we did a couple more things while we were in Queenstown. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we spent our last day there. We hiked up a bit of a mountain that gives a great view of the mountains and the lake that Queenstown is located right beside. And so that was a bit of a... I'm just going to throw it out there. I had a bit of an emotional breakdown that day. Didn't really want to be walking up that hill. But it was definitely worth it, I would say. What would you say?
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful view. And you can see the, I don't know, I can't remember what it was called, the go-kart hill thing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We mentioned in episode 19 of the podcast, when we talk a little bit more about the extreme activities in New Zealand, that you can actually do this sort of downhill go-kart thing that's really popular. And so you can watch the course. It's also pretty cool because AJ Hackett has another bungee jump that's actually at the top of this hill. And most people who do it do a lot of really cool things. They'll kind of handstand on the edge and then dive off or do a flip. It's pretty awesome. If I wasn't so broke by this point, I may have engaged in a third bungee jump.
Yeah, because bungee jumping is not cheap. So we spent a solid amount of money to do the Nevis, the bridge, and the bungee swing.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Skydive.
Yeah, between all of our bungees and our skydive, we must have dropped $800 at least.
And we also paid to do a tour down to Milford Sound.
Yeah, so that was a day that we spent there. Went to the fjords of New Zealand, which is pretty spectacular. I mean, it is a long drive from Queenstown. You do spend quite a bit of time in the tour on a bus, which, if you've listened to our other podcasts, you'll probably know by now that Ryan and I are not a huge fan of tours where you spend most of the time on the bus. But the scenery was definitely worth it.
Yeah, it was cool going down into this big fjord and doing a boat trip. It was pretty cool. Yeah, we've talked a bit before about doing bus tours, and I feel like you don't really get a great sense for things because you are with a big group of people and you stop to look at stuff occasionally, but it's mostly just a photo stop, and then there's a whole bunch of people taking photos, and it kind of...
It's you're basically lining up for this.
Yeah, it feels kind of not authentic and not that great. So I don't know if I would... I don't wish, I guess, but if we went back, I would definitely like to have a car and drive around and explore more on my own instead of being constrained to a bus.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Stray was a great way to get around New Zealand, but if you were to go back, what would you do? We talked in episode 19 a bit about the different options and
I think I'd like to rent a nicer camper van. Maybe not one as the ghetto base model, but one a little bit nicer than that.
Yeah, so we went with Juicy when we were in Australia, and we definitely got the very, very base model. I really loved that van by the end of our 6 weeks in it, though. But it would have been nice, definitely, with a little bit more space. Keep it a little bit more tidy, I guess. Yeah,
for sure. So we did Milford Sound, and then from Queenstown, we went to Mount Cook, which is just one of the most spectacular areas I've ever been.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is coming from, two people who grew up just outside of the Rocky Mountains, and then having been to the Swiss Alps as well. New Zealand, Mount Cook area it's up there in terms of beautiful mountains.
Yeah, it's not, it doesn't seem like that unique, I guess, but it's beautiful. Glacial lakes and mountains and glaciers. It's really cool.
Yeah, and we didn't have that much time there. What had happened with our Stray bus is we had not booked onto the bus to get out of Queenstown after 3 days. And so we ended up staying in Queenstown for 5 days, which 2 days isn't usually a huge difference in terms of a long-term trip, but we actually had 3 weeks in New Zealand, and we had a flight booked back to Canada. So we really didn't have that much flex time. So staying those extra 2 days in Queenstown did make us a little bit rushed in our other locations in New Zealand.
Yeah, and it's kind of a bit of a bummer. We kind of rushed from Queenstown almost all the way to Auckland. We went to Mount Cook, Rangitata,
Yeah.
and did some whitewater rafting there. Kaikoura, Wellington, Rotorua, Auckland. But just, I think we stayed one night in all of those places.
Yeah, so just to get back to Mount Cook, what I was going to say is because we were so rushed is that we drove in the morning. We did a hike in the afternoon, which is like fairly basic, walk to a glacial lake, kind of just, spend some time in nature, enjoying the area, and then came back, slept overnight, and then we're on our way again. So you can actually, I think Mount Cook is one of the training mountains for Everest, is it not?
I don't know.
I think I remember hearing.
Well, it's because then the guy from New Zealand was like the first person to climb Everest. I think.
And I think he used summited Mount Cook as a practice run.
Yeah, and then I think there's a statue of him there.
Cool. I probably should have imitated it and taken a photo.
Maybe. But yeah, no, it's a beautiful region, and it would have been really nice to stay there a little bit longer and do some hiking. I remember through this portion of the trip, we were both going through some anxiety about going home, but also feeling kind of a bit regretful that we didn't have more time to do more stuff.
Yeah, so maybe let's talk about that just briefly, sort of the emotional aspect of this last leg of our trip. Because I think for me, I went through a lot of different emotions. I went from being sort of resentful that I had to go home, to like stressed that I was going home, to really anxious, to sad, to excited to see my friends and family, to, thinking about, oh, maybe I could go to Fiji for Christmas. Like, I think we kind of really went full circle with those emotions. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, we had booked our flight before we went to New Zealand, but not too long before. But yeah, I didn't really want to go back because we had graduated university and then went traveling. So it was like, you're going to have to go get a real job, which was something that gave me a lot of stress and anxiety because I wasn't sure in myself of being able to like, really do anything.
Yeah, for sure. There was that stress, like, where are we going to live? What are we going to do? Yeah, just a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is something that I really fight against because I don't like going into a situation without a plan and without knowing how things are going to be. And so that was really difficult. And then going home and being like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, live in my parents' basement? Like, just kind of a frustrating and anxiety-ridden time, I think, for us.
And at that point, for me, my way of dealing with it was just by not thinking about it. So it was this thing that had kind of been looming for quite a while. Like 3 months into the trip, you're like, whoa, we're halfway through. And then leaving Australia, you're like, wow, this thing's like really almost over, like 3 more weeks. And then like the countdown is on, and like, I think my gut was telling me like, you don't want to do this. Like, you don't want to go home. But I was just like, oh, I've got to go back and find a job that, like, there really was at that point, because I had, we both graduated with bachelors of commerces. But like, it's kind of a general vague thing. I had no idea what kind of job I wanted to work. And I was like, oh, I'll just go back and hopefully find a job that's looking for like a workplace that was looking for someone with a commerce degree. I was kind of uncertain if I would get a good job, a well-paying job, if I would like it. I didn't really have high expectations for liking it, but it kind of just felt like that. Like, that's what I had to do. Like, you graduate university, and then like traveling's permitted for a little while, and then after that's over, you come back and you go into a job.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting how you talk about that your gut told you like, this isn't right, but you're like, I have to do this, because I think society really puts this expectation onto people. It's like, oh, you graduate from high school, you need to go to university, you need to finish university, and then you need to get a job. And I felt a lot of the exact same stressors. It's like, well, you know, I've had my fun now. People expect me to get a job. You know, like my parents paid for me to go to university. I need to use this degree now. You know, I need to be out there bettering the world. Like dicking around, traveling isn't doing that. And I think that was one thing that made coming home really hard. And then it also made leaving again really hard because it wasn't really acceptable to go out and just play again. Do you know what I mean?
Kind of. I would just say more that like when for me, people kind of sell university as like, oh, it's just like this, you get a university degree and then if you don't want to do something with it, that's fine. But then you've got it just in case. But then once you graduate from university with a university degree, there is a lot of pressure to use it. So you have this sunk cost 4 years doing this thing that maybe you didn't enjoy. So it's like, well, why does that doesn't make any sense unless I actually use it. So you do feel like this pressure to actually use your degree.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're both kind of working jobs right now where we're not really using our degree. Do you sort of feel any guilt behind that? Like you wasted 4 years of your life, or you're wasting this thing that your parents paid for?
No, but I feel like happy with where I'm at now, and that involved a stopover in university. But I think university, that 4 years could have been way better spent for me, in terms of using time, money, and resources to do stuff that I enjoy, and that's going to lead me to a place where I want to be.
Yeah.
But like it's nice, like getting out, getting away from home, and learning to be independent was a big thing for me. And I think university has some value in that. Like it's a sanctioned reason for people to leave home, because I think a lot of people who don't go to university stay at home and then they don't really develop and get out of those like childhood thought patterns.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's safe to say that our last sort of 2 weeks in New Zealand were very sort of emotional roller coasters. Like I think I had a few different emotional breakdowns, you know, tears were involved. I wasn't really conscious of exactly what I was feeling, but I was definitely feeling stuff. And I knew that it was stressful and it was hard. Yeah, it was definitely a hard time in my travels for me, personally.
Yeah, and I think we had a couple fights about it because at that point in time we were really not dealing with our emotions, and we would kind of put a lot of shit on each other.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you are dealing with some form of stress and you're with somebody else all the time and you're not really sure why you're stressed, it's pretty easy to just blame the other person. Or, you know, for me, a big thing was Ryan did something little that irritated me, and it's like, okay, this is my outlet. You know, he's done this little thing, like I can just take out this emotion on him now. And so, yeah, definitely a tough few weeks for us. And on top of that, we kind of had our last hurrah in Queenstown, where we spent pretty much the last of our savings. Like going through the rest of New Zealand, we were fairly broke.
Yeah, so we didn't have much time. We also had hardly any money, so we didn't do a heck of a lot anywhere really.
Yeah, I have a pretty good memory of being in Kaikoura.
Yeah.
Kaikoura, it's on the coast on the South Island in sort of like the northeast. A really popular spot for whale watching, and if you can't whale watch, you can fish. There's some sightseeing you can do, and it was kind of crap weather when we were there. Whale watching wasn't really possible because of the rain, and lots of people on our bus did go out and do other activities and had a great one day there, and instead we kind of, I'm just going to throw it out there and say, moped around. Like kind of felt sorry for ourselves a little bit. Like, oh, we don't have any money, we're going home soon, like this kind of sucks. And I think a lot of the last week or so in New Zealand was spent kind of going through the motions.
So if you were talking to someone who's nearing the end of a long backpacking trip right now and feeling nervous about going home, what do you think are like the best practices for going through that experience?
I think it's sort of similar to what we talked about in our happiness and travel episode, where we talked about being able to take that happiness home. Because I think for us on our first trip, we were very much like, okay, this has been fun, and now the fun's sort of over. Now we have to go get jobs. Whereas the second time around, we were more like, okay, how can we, make our lives awesome when we get home? How can we take this happiness that we found traveling and bring it home? I think spending the last bit of a long trip somewhere where you can really relax and you're not going all the time, like being in Jamaica, was really beneficial for us.
And it was somewhere where we could be more reflective too. And I think that's the problem the first time versus the second time. The first time I denied going home. I just didn't think about it, and eventually it happened, and I was like not prepared for it. The second time I tried to be accepting of it and then think about how I wanted to set up my life afterwards, and it hasn't been a walk in the park by any means. Like, I still have the urge to, I guess, run away and go traveling.
Yeah, for sure. Me too.
When things get stressful here, but I think we've got ourselves into a situation that's better, but I think we learned from that first time.
Yeah, definitely. We learned a ton from, every time you travel, you see something new, you experience a new culture, you definitely learn something about yourself and the people that you're with.
Yeah, and I would say to someone who is in that spot where like trip's ending and their gut, like listen to your gut. If your gut's like, I don't want to go home, but your head's like, oh, I don't have any money, I have to stop traveling. Like, maybe think about going home for a little bit, not committing to a serious job, and looking at opportunities to teach English or opportunities to work and travel. Because if your gut's telling you to stay away, that's a sign that you should look deeper into.
Yeah, for sure. It's important to listen to your gut.
So after the South Island, we didn't really have any time in the North Island, and we missed out on some cool stuff.
Yeah, so a big attraction on the North Island is going to the glowworm caves on the western side of the North Island. And unfortunately, we didn't get to do that, although apparently they're really, really cool. You get like an inner tube, and then I think you get like a lamp on your head, maybe, or maybe not. You just go in the dark, and I guess there's these like worms that glow. And apparently they're absolutely beautiful. Yeah,
and we also missed out on Hobbiton.
Yeah.
Which I kind of wanted to go to. You weren't so much. It's funny being in New Zealand, because if you have watched The Lord of the Rings, you kind of feel like you're in Lord of the Rings. And then everywhere you go, people are like, oh, this spot, that was in The Lord of the Rings. This was in The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's like constant. It's pretty funny. Yeah, no, I kind of wish I would have gone to Hobbiton, especially since The Hobbit's come out since then.
Yeah.
And I think they were filming at the time we were there, so it would have been pretty cool to go and see Hobbiton.
Yeah, and
Hobbit Town or Hobbiton?
I think it's Hobbiton. And then there's some other cool stuff, and even north of Auckland. Like there's that beach where you can dig a hole, and you've got like your own kind of hot tub thing going.
Yeah, there's like something about the way the water is. It's thermal when you dig deep, so you make this like a little hot tub for yourself in the sand, which apparently is really cool. A lot of really beautiful rock formations up north. It was cool that we had a few days in Auckland, and we actually had a pretty cool experience. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So we had met two girls in Switzerland. We were staying at the same hostel, and they lived in Auckland. And then we messaged them. We told them at the time that we were going to be in New Zealand, and they were like, oh, make sure you message us. We'll show you around Auckland. So then when we did get to Auckland, we did meet up, and they took us on a tour around the city and to see some other cool stuff just outside of the city. And it was this really awesome trip. Like, it's awesome to meet two like super nice people like that who will show you around.
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of funny because Switzerland is really, really expensive, so we couldn't really afford to eat out. And we kept bumping into them in the kitchen of our hostel. And it just happened that we always started talking to them because we were always waiting for pans, because there was only like 2 frying pans for this kitchen. And so we kind of bonded over like, oh, waiting for a pan again. And then, just kind of, oh, we're coming to New Zealand in December. And this was July, so like 5 months later. August. And they're like, yeah, for sure. Like, message us on Facebook. We'll take you around. And we kind of threw it out there, not really having much expectation. And yeah, they picked us up, toured us around, showed us Auckland and the surrounding area. And it was actually really cool.
Yeah. And we've kind of talked about it before, about how you seem to make friends much quicker when you're traveling than when you're at home. Like, we spent probably a total of like 3 hours hanging out. But then it was like, you know, meeting up with like a long lost friend versus, you know, you meet someone for the first time. When you're home and it's like, you gotta go through this like slow feeling out process.
Yeah. Like, do we want to be friends? Are they good enough to be my friend? Am I good enough to be theirs? It's like this whole like social situation that you kind of go through before you decide on a friend when you're at home. And it's just like, yeah, these girls just treated us like we were best friends, which was really, really cool.
Yeah. And it's definitely not a unique experience. We met a couple of people in other spots who we met up with later on when we were on their home terrain. We've shown people around when they're visiting in Canada as well. And I don't know, there's something about like the situation itself seems socially awkward, but there's something about like the travel dynamic that just makes it comfortable. Yeah, I think when you're at home, you have a lot more pressure to be something that you're maybe not. And then I think people when traveling are a little bit more authentic, guards down, just kind of true to themselves. And I think when people do have their guards down and are just fine being who they are, you connect a lot quicker because there's so much, and there's also more relatable stuff. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we spent a whole day with these girls and we just met them traveling. So, I mean, we literally knew nothing about their lives in New Zealand. So it was cool to actually get to know them on a level outside of their travels. Yeah, and we had so it was just about Christmas, the closing days. And it was kind of trippy being in Auckland for Christmas because it's like summer. Yeah, and our very last night in New Zealand, after spending the day with these two girls, we went up to the top of the tower in Auckland. So you can do like a bungee sort of plummet thing off of it. Well, there's another, I think it's an AJ Hackett thing off of there. Maybe not. It's not really a bungee jump. It's like a rappel, but you rappel face down. And then there's a different bungee jump off the bridge in Auckland. Yeah, for sure. Anyways, we went up the tower, not to do the rappel, just to go up and see the view of the city and the lights at night. And they had like a sleigh and a Santa and a bunch of like presents and, you know, the whole Christmas shabam up there. But it's weird because it just feels so wrong because it's not snowing, it's not cold out. We're in shorts and t-shirts. Yeah, and 30 hours later, we're back in like negative 25. So that was good. Yeah, for sure. Anything else you want to touch on? No, that's it. Well, the one thing is, I just left with such a positive feeling about New Zealand. Like really a place I would like to go back to and a place I kind of wanted to live. I think I said that in the last podcast, but like multiple times when we were there, I was like, oh, it'd be sweet to live here. It's kind of like, there's a lot of features that remind me of Canada. Like there's lots of space, not that many people. The interactions between people are very like nice and relaxed. Everyone's pretty relaxed. Other than the driving's pretty crazy. Maybe it gets a little crazy over winding roads, and they're flying around on them. But you definitely said quite a bit that you wanted to live in New Zealand. So perhaps we'll have to make a trip sometime soon. And if we were to go back, what would you want to do that we didn't do? Glowworm Caves, Hobbiton. North. I'd like to start on the North Island and work my way down. Yeah, I'd really love to get a van and drive around, and I think it's a cool place to do that because it is pretty small. Yeah, you can driving, camping, hiking, outdoor stuff, lots of Fergburger, more hiking to work off the Fergburger. Yeah, and I definitely think it's somewhere we're going to go back to. Oh, totally. Okay.
We're gonna go look up flights, so we'll see you guys later.
Yeah, when we'll post some show notes on our website, theworldwanderers.com, and we'd really love to hear if there's anything you want to hear us talk about, or you have any feedback or any questions for us. Just send us an email at theworldwandererspodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.